They were barely 18, yet the law branded them terrorists. In the heart of Nairobi, sirens wailed louder than their fading hopes. Inside the courthouse, iron bars stretched long shadows across young faces. Boys in scuffed school shoes, girls in borrowed jackets. They carried no weapons, only dreams. Now they stood accused of terror. Outside, chaos wore a mother's anguished expression. Screams sliced the air. Fathers knelt on rough concrete. One barefoot woman, trembling, lifted her hands to the sky and sobbed, "Release my son, or I will bear myself before the world." What happens to a nation that fears its youth more than its corruption? When did peaceful protest turn into a punishable crime? And who profits when courthouses become stages of dread? President William Ruto's government labels this justice. But former Chief Justice David Maraga calls it what it is, a war on the young. If a generation this tender can be silenced, who will speak next? If this is Kenya's present, what stops it from becoming any of us tomorrow? This is more than a trial. It's a mirror, and the reflection chills the soul. If you believe Africa deserves clarity, follow this channel. Stay with us. For a truth that refuses to fade. It began like many days of hope, quietly on the streets. On July 7th, 2025, the anniversary of Saba Saba, Kenya stirred to the rhythm of resistance. Not soldiers, not gunfire, but thousands of footsteps marching through Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa. Youth moved as one, not in fury, but in memory of promises made and shattered. They brought no weapons, only dreams etched in bold ink. Justice for all, jobs over jail. Does Kenya belong to its people? Was that too bold a demand? Had fairness become a danger? University students linked arms with street vendors. Young mothers hummed as they pushed strollers past tear-stained walls. Street kids marched beside lawyers. A nation's future pulsed forward, united in its cry for dignity. But by midday, songs were swallowed by sirens. Tear gas erupted like muted thunder. Rubber bullets shredded hope. What kind of leadership meets peace with violence? What did the government fear, placards or truth? From alleys and armored trucks, riot police emerged like shadows. Crowds scattered. Some ducked behind buses. Others fell. A girl was dragged across asphalt. A boy gripped the flag before being struck down. Under President William Ruto's watch, Nairobi's streets morphed from hope to horror. Police deemed it a necessary response. But what necessity justifies snatching teenagers into vans without warning? What law permits beating a child for raising their voice? By nightfall, over 100 youth were arrested in Nairobi alone. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights reported 532 detentions nationwide. They charge terrorism. No explosives, no plots, no sabotage, just a generation weary of seeing its future bartered by broken politics. Yet instead of answers, they received cages, and the question grew louder. When did protest become proof of guilt? Who decided the Constitution ends where courage begins? In the chaos, silence descended, not peace, but oppression. Parents lingered outside stations. Lawyers demanded entry, but were refused. Phones were seized, names withheld. Was this justice? Or a test of fear? Even former Chief Justice David Maraga couldn't ignore it. Addressing the press, he declared, "These are not prosecutions. These are punishments for speaking." His words echoed through the city. But would the courts heed them? The sky darkened, placards lay discarded, streets emptied, yet the question refused to die. What nation imprisons its children for dreaming? Then, near the courthouse wall, a voice pierced the stillness, one that no longer trembled. A young man, no older than 20, bruised but resolute, murmured, "We are not afraid. We are just exhausted. Exhausted of watching dreams crushed in courtrooms." Inside Nairobi remand prison's gray walls, the echoes weren't of hardened criminals, but of boys calling for their mothers. They were teenagers, some fresh from secondary school, locked behind rusted bars. Their futures halted mid-sentence. Some had never spent a night away from home. Now they slept on cold floors, sharing cramped cells with strangers twice their age. No explanations, no briefings, just one word stamped on their files: terrorism. How do you grasp that at 18? When you held a placard, not a weapon. When all you sought was to be heard, not hunted. At the court in Thika, bail was set at 100,000 Kenyan shillings, nearly a year's income for most families. Many lacked bank accounts. One boy whispered to a social worker, "My mother has no bank account." Another teenager stared blankly, silent, until tears broke during roll call. President William Ruto's administration defended the charges as security measures. But what security criminalizes poverty? What safety demands silence from its own children? These weren't criminals. They were students, street hawkers, job seekers, all cast into the same legal fire, branded with the same label. No lawyers stood for them in initial hearings. Public defenders were overwhelmed, unprepared, sometimes absent. One 19-year-old was separated from his cousin and placed in solitary confinement. No charges read, no rights explained. What happens when law forgets its duty to clarify? Another youth, 17, was allegedly beaten en route from Nuru to Nairobi. His parents learned his location only after a journalist posted his name online. Why must a mother scour Twitter for her son? Still, the state's silence was relentless. Names were hidden, locations obscured. A Ministry of Interior offered no comment. Families were told to wait. Meanwhile, inside those cells, a different tale unfolded: hunger, despair. Some began hunger strikes. Others etched messages into walls: pleas, prayers, home village names. What else could they do when speech was caged? Legal experts warned that applying the Prevention of Terrorism Act this way violates Kenya's 2010 constitution. But no judge overturned the charges. The word terrorist had already stained their identities like dust on skin. In another case, a boy from Eldoret marched with a sign reading, "My voice matters." He was detained, held days without contact, allowed one monitored call cut short when he mentioned his principal. What lesson does that teach about speech? A 19-year-old from Mombasa with sickle cell anemia was denied medication during his first 72 hours. His mother stood outside with his medical file guards ignored her. Since when does paperwork beg for mercy? A 16-year-old girl from Kisumu was held in a cell without female guards, live-streaming the protest her only offense. Questioned for hours, then left without supplies, her parents uninformed. Her schoolmates learned via a release flyer. In Nairobi, a youth leader who volunteered for civic workshops was charged as an unrest organizer, his only tool a notebook of constitutional quotes. The Ministry of Youth Affairs stayed mute. The Kenya National Human Rights Commission's statement was buried under headlines of foreign investment and presidential trips. Inside courtrooms, the language stayed cold: subjects under inquiry, pre-trial risks. But outside the gates, a mother screamed her son's name until her voice shattered. At Nairobi's courthouse gates, the air thickened like smoke. Dozens of parents stood united, mothers barefoot, fathers with shaking hands. Some held photos, others gripped rosaries. The sound was more than grief, it was disbelief. How had justice grown so harsh? How had Kenya learned to treat its children? As criminals? They gathered before dawn, unfed, sleepless. Hunger faded, freedom mattered. An elderly barefoot woman collapsed, pounding concrete, shouting her son's name. Beside her, another mother removed her headscarf. vowing to strip if her daughter wasn't freed. Dignity paled beside silence. One cried, "I bore a boy, not a terrorist." Her voice broke, but her resolve held. Her father knelt, blocking traffic. With a school report card, we kept him in school. Now they call him violent. His tone was not rage, but ruin. A teenage sibling passed water, whispering, "They haven't eaten in days." Another held a cardboard prayer, "God, bring them back." An older woman stood tall, Bible pressed to her chest, singing, "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah." Soon others joined mothers, fathers, strangers needing only pain and memory. As you read, pause with us. If your heart aches, comment Amen and share prayers for justice. Let your voice join theirs. Buses honked. Police watched behind shields. But hymns rose. By nightfall, hundreds gathered, bringing candles, food from Kibera, Mathatha, Machakos, not just for their own, but for every caged youth. Signs read, "Where is justice? Children are not criminals. We will not forget." Authorities insisted the arrests were legal under President William Ruto, but the streets revealed truth heartbreak in uniforms. A pastor prayed, "Lord, shield our children from fear." Some collapsed into his arms. Journalists filmed, NGOs noted. But faces told the story, wrinkled brows, bloodshot eyes, lips praying. It wasn't a protest. It was a vigil. Women formed a circle, hands locked. "We're not leaving," one said. "If they don't release them, arrest us too," another added. The state stayed silent. No officials, no charge details, just delayed hearings. Behind walls, sons waited. Outside, mothers refused to yield. One grandmother said, "If they jail the young, who builds this nation when we're gone?" It began with legislation. The Prevention of Terrorism Act, meant for extremism, now ensnares teenage protesters with cardboard signs. Government spokespersons cited public safety and national interest for the Saba Saba arrests. They claimed a duty to curb unrest. But who defines unrest? Since when do job demands equal subversion? President William Ruto's administration held firm. No one is above the law. But if the law now targets children with no records, no weapons, no counsel, what is being safeguarded? Using anti-terror laws on over 500 citizens, mostly under 25, sent shockwaves beyond Kenya. Human Rights Watch warned of a trend in East Africa using terror laws to suppress. Amnesty International deemed it a violation of justice. Former Chief Justice David Maraga called it trumped-up charges, not justice, but intimidation. The state feared not bombs, but voices. Legal experts in Nairobi cited a dangerous precedent broadening. Terrorism laws to include peaceful protests risks a perpetual emergency where rights vanish. A lawyer said, "They're charged under laws for armed insurgents, no explosives. No coordination, just words, just hope. It's not about guilt. It's about fear." Prosecutors demanded no bail, citing national threat. Judges, often pressured, complied. Youth returned to overcrowded cells, some for 14 days without hearings. What message does that send when laws become chains? When dissent equals danger, protesters chanted slogans, not bullets, demanded fairness, met tear gas, detention, silence. A University of Nairobi professor noted, "This is legal erosion chipping at the Constitution, one protest at a time." As the state persisted, public fear swelled. Could a rally land you in jail? Did a video count as incitement? Was activism now illegal? The National Council for Civil Liberties reported 63 prolonged detentions without trial. A 19-year-old was held 10 days under review. In Eldoret, a lawyer was barred from a detainee for uncleared credentials. In Kisii, a daughter's file was misplaced. In Nuru, A boy was released after 9 days, no apology, no record cleared. The director of public prosecutions stayed mute. A new term emerged online: legalized disappearance. An advocate said, "What starts with protest ends with prison if we don't speak." On July 9, 2025, a small conference room in Nairobi's Upper Hill overflowed journalists, law students, retired judges, activists packed tight. At the front, flanked by case files, a coalition of lawyers vowed, "We won't let them stand alone. If the government makes criminals of these children, it must arrest us too." Why must citizens remind the state of its constitution? The Kenya Human Rights Commission flagged the arrests as disproportionate and political. Amnesty Kenya pushed for bail and transparency. Global attention grew Human Rights Watch, and the UN demanded detention access and evidence. But the real force came from below. Within 48 hours, 200 legal professionals offered pro bono aid. Mobile money flooded with donations. Teachers shared salaries. Alumni crowdfunded. A principal tweeted, "If they jail our students, we'll bail them out." In Eldoret, a mosque collected funds post-prayer. In Nairobi, artists held poetry nights. Farmers from Nairobi sent food to corp families. It wasn't just funds, it was defiance. These youth weren't alone. Among lawyers was Mutumbi Wamu, 73, once jailed under Mu for defending activists. Now, in his worn brown coat, he returned to court as a shield. "I recognize this script," he told a reporter. Then, communists, now terrorists. The name shifts, the fear stays. In Mombasa, he fought for a 17-year-old with no record, held 5 days, his only possession a Constitution copy. Since when does carrying rights make you a threat? During a break, Wamu stood, hands clasped. "They jailed me in '88. I stood again. These children will too." Behind him, young lawyers nodded not just for clients, but for law as protection. Across courthouse walls, posters appeared handwritten by families, posted by students. One repeated, "We hold the line." A retired Kasumu teacher stood daily with a sign, "My students are not terrorists." She knew their struggles. "I've seen them study by candlelight. How dare they call them threats?" In Kericho, a retired magistrate turned his living room into a hub law books lining walls, phone ringing nonstop, appeals drafted, hope rebuilt. How many elders must rise before youth can stand? This was never just a protest, never only arrests or courts. It's a reminder sharp, urgent that dissent is freedom's spine. Across Nairobi's dusty roads, July 7th's echoes linger in empty school desks, in mothers' tears, in young Kenyans' hesitation to speak. When a generation falls silent, who sings for tomorrow? Elders across Africa once called disruptors, agitators feel a familiar sting. This isn't just Kenya's fight. It's a diaspora mirror. Can we still spot oppression in suits and files? President William Ruto hasn't addressed this core. Kenya waits. The continent watches. Gen Z rises not with stones, but slogans, not guns, but questions. How many must suffer before the law recalls its purpose? How long before silence is complicity? To our global community, what does this reveal of Ruto's vision for youth? What legacy his silence or sentence? Share thoughts below. What would you tell a Kenyan protester? Ruto, your younger self? Type Rise Africa if you stand with them. If you value stories against forgetting, stay with us. Share with someone who stood, believes, refuses silence. Follow for Tailies Amplifying Africa. Thank you. See you next time.